Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tetzaveh. Before we launch into Tetzaveh, however, um, spare a thought for Tetzaveh. This week, of course, is Purim, and Tetzaveh is normally Shabbat Zachor, or it's very rarely, as this year, it's just the day after Purim. In Jerusalem, it will be celebrated as Purim. By the way, a quiz question, if you ever want to have one for Jewish knowledge quiz, where will you ever get 5 Shabbatot in a row where you have at least 2 Torah scrolls? And it's this year, and it's in Jerusalem, the 4 special Shabbatot, and the one in the middle, which is Purim, where they will lay in for the maftir what we will be laying on Friday. But because of all of that, Tetzaveh tends not to get much of a look in, and it's not helped by the fact that it deals with things that, with mitzvot, none of which really apply today. So it's a little bit inaccessible, but we hope this evening to make it very accessible. And before we go any further, I'd just like to look at Jonathan's summary, as usual, which he's prepared so nicely. Parshat Tetzaveh, here we go, February the 23rd. The shul as it was, and after yesterday's announcement, B'ezrat Hashem as it will be in a few months' time. Here is Tetzaveh in a nutshell. So God tells Moses to receive from the children of Israel pure olive oil to feed the everlasting flame of the menorah. We'll look at that, see exactly what that means a bit later, which Aaron is to kindle each day from evening till morning. The priestly garments to be worn by the Kohanim while serving in the sanctuary are described. All the Kohanim wore the ketonet, which is a full-length linen tunic, the mechnesayim, the linen breeches, the mitznefet or mikbat, which is a linen turban, and the avnet, which was like a long sash wound above the waist. In addition, the Kohen Gadol wore the ephod, an apron-like garment made of blue and purple red-dyed wool and linen and gold thread. The choshen, which we'll be looking at later, breastplate containing 12 precious stones, inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. The me'il, a cloak of blue wool with gold bells and decorative pomegranates on its hem. The tzitz, a golden plate worn on the forehead, bearing the inscription Kodesh Lashem, holy to God. And Tetzaveh also includes God's detailed instructions for the 7-day initiation of Aaron and his sons, Nadav, Abihu, Elazar, and Itamar, into the priesthood. It also contains the Korban Tamid, the daily sacrifice, and instructions for making of the golden altar on which the ketoret, the incense, was burned. So, Yoram Ra'anan's take on this week's parasha. On the right, we have the menorah, 7-branch candelabra in the Mishkan, and then later on in the Beit HaMikdash in the temple. And on the left, we have the Mizbach HaZahav, the golden altar, where the ketoret, the incense, was burnt daily, twice daily, morning and late afternoon. And these two things actually bookend the Sedra. The menorah is at the very beginning, and the ketoret, the incense, is at the very end, as we shall see in a moment. So my thanks to Emily for once again putting together this PowerPoint, taking what I have done and making it look much more attractive, also beginning with a picture of our shul. And here we are. So we actually have 2 types of bookends that I want to address. The first one that I want to address is not what we mentioned just now, but it is the beginning of Truma and almost the end of Tetzaveh. The whole thing, these 2 parashiyot, about making the Mishkan, the sanctuary, and the avodah, the service that will go on in that sanctuary. This is Terumah and Tetzaveh combined. So we started out last week, and we saw this verse last week. They will make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. And you'll see that I've color-coded Mikdash, sanctuary, and Shachan, which denotes God's presence. And by the way, that is where the word Mishkan comes from. So that's the beginning of it. The end in Tetzaveh is this. You see this word Mikdash coming again. The Kiddashti again, et Ohel Moed, with HaMitzbech, with Aaron Banav, Akadesh, again emphasized. Lechahenli, and then once again, V'shachanti b'toch b'nei Yisrael. V'aydi lahem Elohim, v'yadu ki ani Hashem Elohim, asher hotzeti otam me'eretz Mitzrayim, l'shochni b'tocham, ani Hashem Elohim. So this means there I will meet with the Israelites, and it will be sanctified by my
Lost you, Rabbi.
They haven't. They're still frozen. No, they're still muted. Oh.
No, you have come back. Rabbi, can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
Okay, please all mute yourselves again. My internet completely conked out. We will go back to that screen. And here we are. So these words are color-coded because they link up with the first part. Tetzaveh, you've got the parts in blue, linking up the parts in blue with Truma, the sanctification. And even where we translate it, I will consecrate Aaron, but the Hebrew is akadesh, which means the same thing, to consecrate, to sanctify. So there's clearly bookended between Truma and Tetzaveh. What is also bookended, the words in green, I will dwell among the Israelites, I will dwell among them. I brought them out of Egypt. That's why I brought them out, to dwell amongst them. So we can see this bookending between the beginning of Truma and almost at the end of Tetzaveh. But there's another bookending which I alluded to just earlier, the menorah and the incense altar. So these bookends are also very linked, very much linked, but with another word. And the word is tamid. V'ikhu elecha shemen zayit zach, katid lamo lalot ner tamid. They shall take for you pure pressed olive oil for illumination, to light the lamp continually from evening to morning before the Lord for their generations. And this again, lifnei Hashem l'dorotam, is again brought in later on. So we find that towards the end of the Sedra, actually the very end of the Sedra, we have the incense. On it, Aaron shall burn aromatic incense. He shall burn it every morning when he cleans the lamps. And when else? Aaron shall burn the incense towards twilight, when he lights the lamps, a continual incense offering before the Lord for your generations. So here we have once again this word tamid, lifnei Hashem ledorotechem. So let's go back to the light first of all. Was it actually continuous? No, it was continual. We'll see the difference a bit later. But both are described before the Lord, and both take place in the evening and the morning. In fact, the incense was in the evening, happened when they were lighting the menorah, at exact time, in the middle, according to many commentators. And then when they cleaned out the bowls of the cups of the tops of the menorah from the debris from the previous night's lighting, that's the point they would have the ketoret, the incense, in the morning. Now, the word tamid actually occurs elsewhere in the parasha in connection with three other things: Aaron's breastplate, the headband that he would wear, and the daily sacrifice. So with the breastplate, Aaron shall carry the names of the children of Israel on his heart before God continually. That should have been in blue. It is in the Hebrew, Lifnei Hashem Tamid. You see, it says it twice, in fact, over here and over here. And again, with it sits the headband. V'haya metzach Aaron. It was go on Aaron's forehead. V'haya mitzcho tamid, and it will be continually l'ratzon lahel b'nei Hashem, before Hashem. And we have also the daily sacrifice, the korban tamid as it's known. Year-old lambs to a day of perpetuity. Again, a tamid, a continual burnt offering at the entrance to the Ohel Moed. Once again, we have this tamid lifnei Hashem. All of them, the menorah and the incense and these three things here, all of them lifnei Hashem tamid, is before Hashem tamid, continually. So what do we mean by that? So Rashi on the menorah says, tamid continually means when you do something every night as described here, it may be termed tamid continually. It's not continuous. Continuous means non-stop. Continually means habitually, very, very regularly. Now the word tamid in the Torah can occasionally be used, something which is continuous, and we will see an example of that later. But generally, and when it's used in this week's parasha, it means something which is a routine. So here we are. Tamid denotes an action which is not perpetual, not continuous, but daily. By being a regular, daily, constant rhythm, it engenders the momentum and the power of something which is continuous. So by us doing these acts daily, which are not all the time, but they are continual, we foster something which does become continuous, non-stop, which is God's presence. Today, in place of the Korban Tamid, the daily offering, and the Ketoret, we have regular prayer, which can also lead to the sense of being in the presence of God. And we also have in Shul what we call the Ner Tamid, to remind us of the menorah in the Beit HaMikdash, the everlasting light. And we burn that as an ongoing sign of this connection between us and God. So, something slightly different. Beethoven, Anthony Trollope, and Immanuel Kant. So I want to quote from what Rabbi Sachs wrote about the three of them several years ago in Covenant of Conversation. So first of all, starting with the great musician Beethoven. He rose each morning at dawn and made himself coffee. Each cup had to be made with exactly 60 beans. He would then sit at his desk and compose until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He would then go for a long walk, taking with him a pencil and some sheets of music paper, to record any ideas that came to him along the way. Each night after supper, he would have a beer, smoke a pipe, and go to bed early. Anthony Trollope, the famous author, who as his day job worked for the post office, paid a groom to wake him every day at 5 a.m. By 5:30, he would be at his desk, and he would then write for 3 hours, working to produce 250 words each quarter of an hour, no pressure. This way, he wrote 47 novels, many of them 3 volumes in length, as well as 16 other books. If he finished a novel before the day's 3 hours were over, he would immediately begin the next. Immanuel Kant, the most brilliant philosopher in modern times, was famous also for his routine: getting up, drinking coffee, writing, giving lectures, eating, taking a walk. And the neighbors knew precisely that the time was 3:30 p.m. when he stepped outside his door with his gray coat and Spanish stick in his hand. So Rabbi Sachs derived all of this from a book by a fellow called Mason Curry entitled Daily Rituals: How Great Minds Make Time, Find Inspiration, and Get to Work. The book's point is simple. Most creative people have daily rituals. These form the soil in which the seeds of their invention grow. What applies in the arts, the sciences, business, and industry applies equally to the life of the spirit. Achieving any form of spiritual growth requires sustained effort and daily rituals. So what is Klal Gadol BaTorah? The question is asked in the introduction to one of the Midrashim, the great principle of the Torah. Ben Pazi said, it's a verse in this week's parasha. 1 sheep should be offered in the morning and a second in the afternoon. The tamid, the continual thing. And Rabbi Sachs says, or as we might say nowadays, shachas mincha mariv, in a word, routine. That repeated spiritual exercise reconfigures the brain. You know, pause. When Corona started a year ago, I was very anxious that we maintain davening via Zoom at a set time every day. And some said, can we go later? Can we do it here, there? I was really worried. I didn't know how long it was going to last for. I never imagined it would be more than a year, but here we are. I was very worried that if we would fall out of a routine, it would be so incredibly hard to get back. And if we fall out of a routine, it'd be incredibly hard to be productive. I must admit, I wasn't familiar with this work that I've just quoted from Rabbi Sachs, but I've just worried about that. And we see in this week's parasha, so what do we get from a parasha which is very esoteric in many ways? The answer is this notion of a routine. The tamid is so important in life, and it enables us to be creative in the ways that we can be. I just think it's terribly important and even worth stopping the screen share for that. And this is what Rabbi Sachs says. All the high ideals in the world, belief in God's unity, the love of one's neighbor, they count for little unless they're turned into habits of action that become habits of the heart. We can all have a great spiritual experience or moments of insight when we had a great idea, transformative thought, project that could change our lives. But those who take them forward do it through the discipline of hard work sustained over time. Judaism's greatness is that it takes high ideals and exalted visions, the image of God, the faith in God, love of one's neighbor, and turns them into patterns of behavior. Halakha, Jewish law, involves routines that, like those of creative minds, reconfigures the brain, giving discipline to our lives and changing the way that we feel, we think, and we act. This is why halakha is important. This is why the routine is important. Going back to the corona thing, this is not a daily thing, but I asked myself, where would we be without Shabbat at this incredibly difficult time, where for some, you don't know if it's Monday or Thursday, but we have Shabbat every 7 days, and that gives us our routine back, and it also gives us a pause in time. It's an incredible gift. So again, Rabbi Sachs focuses on this idea that what happened in the Mishkan was to take us forward in certain ways that would last well beyond the charismatic leadership of Moshe. What happens when Moshe is gone? Well, tragically, we find that out in next week's parashah. The people panic and they build a golden calf. And we find in our own times when the regular events are taken away from people, panic ensues, as we've seen often in the last year. So taking a verse from the beginning of the parasha, just after the menorah, Moses is told by God, you shall make sacred garments for Aaron your brother, for glory and splendor, lechavod uletifaret. So as Rabbi Sachs writes, the Israelites had to become people who would continue to serve God after Moses had left them. And that was the point of the tabernacle, the ability to sustain long into the future the experience of Sinai and the presence in the midst of the people of God. So what does it mean that Aaron should have garments for glory and splendor, not his glory and splendor, but for the glory of God and the beauty of his presence? That's the Sephono. So the task of the Kohen and the message of his clothes was to be a living symbol of the divine presence in the midst of the nation. And we'll see how that plays out right now. So just taking two examples, we mentioned a number of the garments, but here are two. So the tzitz, which is the headband, made of pure gold, and on the forehead of the high priest, engraved with the phrase, Kodesh Lashem, holy to God. The choshen, that is a mesh of gold and blue, purple, and scarlet wool. Inset into the breastplate are 12 different semi-precious stones, and each stone is engraved the name of one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and that's worn on the heart of the Kohen Gadol. And the fabric is doubled over, and inside the fold, the Urim V'Tumim, which was an oracle which had allowed Israel to ask questions of and receive answers from God. This is the take of Rav Soloveitchik on these two items. So the tzitz on the forehead corresponds to the center of intelligence and wisdom. And when it comes to learning Torah, it's sort of totally objective. The choshen, on the other hand, was on Aaron's heart, the center of love and affection for Israel. And all the names of the tribes were engraved on the choshen, and the Torah calls it the choshen mishpat, the breastplate of justice, judgment. The judging of Bnei Israel was entrusted to the choshen. So when it's the heart, it's not just the cold intelligence, if you like, the facts. You've got to put your heart in it as well. Two very different faculties. Let's see a little bit more about that. The question arises, why Aaron? One thing we haven't said till now is actually the name Moshe does not appear in this week's parasha. And even though it's obvious that God is talking to him and commanding Moshe, this is how it's going to look, his name doesn't appear, whereas his brother's name, Aaron, appears countless times, and he and his family are selected to serve in the Mishkan, not Moshe. Why Aaron, not Moshe? We can say why not Moshe, but even then it would be, and why Aaron? Actually, the two of them together, Moshe and Aaron, made the most incredible partnership. But let's see how that's expressed in the Torah. At the burning bush, Hashem says, I want you to go to Egypt. And Moshe says, no, I don't want to go. Please send someone else. So God was angry with Moshe. And he said, your brother Aaron the Levite can speak well. He's already on his way to meet you. So he was also a prophet. God spoke to Aaron as well. And here's the critical words. His heart will be glad when he sees you. Says Rashi there. Let the heart that rejoiced in the greatness of his brother be vested with the Urim and Thummim. Remember we said they have to be worn on the heart. Have to be worn on the heart. Who's the one to wear on the heart? The one about whom it says his heart was glad. A Kohen Gadol has to be able to feel someone else's feelings and celebrate with people. So, Amram married his father's sister Yocheved. So this is a quote from Exodus Parashat Va'era, a little bit further on after the burning bush. And Yocheved bore him Aaron and Moshe. And here we have curious verse. It was this same Aaron and Moshe to whom the Lord said, bring the Israelites out of Egypt. They were the ones who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing the Israelites out of Egypt. It was this same Moshe and Aaron. So first of all, it says Aaron and Moses. Then it says Moses and Aaron. And in the Hebrew, it's actually in the singular. Who Aaron and Moshe? Literally, he is Aaron and Moshe. He is Moshe and Aaron. They were so close. They worked so well as a team. They were as one. And this is something which, when you consider the sibling rivalries in the book of Bereshit, this is truly remarkable. So there is a verse in Psalms 85, loving kindness and truth meet together. Righteousness and peace kiss each other. Do you know, they're not the same thing. There's loving kindness where everything's wonderful and you're forgiving. No, there's truth. Is it the truth? Then there's righteousness, which suggests also like justice. And then there's peace. What you do, you compromise for peace. Says the Midrash, loving kindness refers to Aaron. Truth, Moshe. Righteousness, Moshe. Peace, Aaron. And Rabbi Sachs, as always, just summed it up so beautifully. Without truth, there could be no vision to inspire a nation. You need the Moshe for that. But without internal peace, there is no nation to inspire. Those are wise words, but they're also sobering words. A nation that does not have internal peace cannot be inspired to do anything, including cooperate in the time of pandemic. Sobering words. So the story of Moshe and Aaron, says Rabbi Sachs, which is the fifth act in the biblical drama of brotherhood. You know, Cain and Abel and Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. Each one ends up better than the one before, but is where finally fraternity reaches the heights. Now, Psalm 133, which is one we know very well because we often sing it. Hinei ma tovu ma'anayim shevet achim gam yachad, which means, how good and pleasant is it when brothers live together in unity? It's like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down upon the collar of his robes. Thanks to Aaron and the honor he showed Moses, at last, brothers learned to live together in unity. You want to know why Aaron was chosen? He was chosen because he was not jealous of his brother Moshe, younger brother, who was given the leadership. And he not only was nice to him on the outside, but his heart celebrated too. That's why a person like that needs to be Kohen Gadol. Rabbi Alex Israel is a teacher in Shivat Har Etzion, formerly of London, and he noted outside the work of the Mishkan, 2 places in the Torah where the word tamid occurs. This continual thing, tamid. So we said tamid, in terms of the mitzvot that we looked at, were actually something regular, not continuous. They gave rise to something continuous, which is God's presence. And here is how that presence is expressed. Go to the Parsha of Baalotcha, and it talks about the cloud guiding the Israelites through the desert as they set off on their travels. On the day the sanctuary was set up, the cloud covered the Mishkan and the tent of testimony, which was the tent of testimony, and in the evening it was in the likeness of fire till morning, cloud by day, fire at night. It was tamid, continually there. The cloud covered it, appearing as a fire at night. So we've got cloud and fire appearing twice there. Where else we have the word tamid? Well, in Parshat Eikev. Parshat Eikev extols the virtues of the land of Israel. Children of Israel are about to go into the land. And these are Moshe's words. It is a land upon which the Lord your God seeks. His eyes are tamid upon it, constantly, continuously upon the land, from the year's beginning to the year's end. There's the pasuk in Hebrew. Eretz asher Hashem Elokecha doresh ota, tamid enei Hashem Elokecha ba. It's as if to say that if we do our bit, the routine of the mitzvot, and particularly the mitzvot of the Mishkan, the idea was they fulfill the routine of the Mishkan, they'll get protection in the desert. And by the way, notice the cloud and the fire. Aren't they similar, the cloud to the ketoret, the incense, and the fire, the flame of the menorah? They were doing the ketoret and the menorah, bookended with this week's parasha. And the promise comes later on, God will reciprocate with his own cloud and fire for our protection. And then they would go in with the Mishkan into the land of Israel, fulfilling their duties in that way, and God in turn will have his eyes on the land constantly. Sounds wonderful. Let's summarize what we have seen tonight. So we started off with 2 sets of bookends. The raison d'etre of the Mishkan, that God would dwell amongst the Israelite camp, expressed at the beginning of Truma and the end of Tetzaveh. And the second set of bookends, the menorah and the incense altar, both daily mitzvot, both carried out at the same time, twice daily. And that was a tamid, which we said in terms of the mitzvot of this week's parasha, is a regular routine. And by the way, I think there's even a further extension to this, because the Kohen Gadol, who was Aaron to start with, the high priest was Aaron to start with, but of course he wasn't going to live forever. His son Elazar would take his place, and thereafter, successive generations. And carrying those garments through from one generation to another was a tamid of another kind, continual carrying through. And we are recipients, we're recipients of that Masorah, as we call it, that tradition. Why was Aaron chosen? So we said his great love for Moshe, his simcha, the simcha of his heart, which he felt deep within himself for another person. Those are the qualities. The one who pursues peace, kindness, that's Aaron. You need the vision, but you also need society. And we repeat this beautiful comment by Rabbi Sachs. Without truth, there could be no vision to inspire a nation, but without internal peace, there is no nation to inspire. In a way, if that's all we take away from Tetzaveh, it's very important, very useful. And we said that God reciprocates the service in the Mishkan. This all sounds wonderful, but and here is the but, a huge but. We've seen the Mishkan is sacred space. We've seen that, we will see in next week's parasha, crowning the project is a sanctity of Shabbat. And we understand the building the Mishkan, important though it is, does not supersede Shabbat. Shabbat is a sign between me and Israel. Now you've got these two sacred spaces, space, actual physical space of the Mishkan, and space in time, an island in time called Shabbat. But then there's a massive blow. Moshe is absent. They can't cope. They build the golden calf. And Aaron was deputizing for Moshe at the time. He for sure carries a share of the blame of the building of the golden calf. So we ask the question, why was Aaron chosen? Even if we follow the view of the Ramban that we mentioned last week, that the Torah follows its exact sequential order, that the command to build the Mishkan came before the sin of the golden calf, and Aaron was chosen before the sin of the golden calf. Why was that? Why was the choice of Aaron not cancelled with the sin of the golden calf? And if we follow the view of Rashi and others, the question is much stronger. How can it be that following the sin of the golden calf, not only does Hashem command the Mishkan, but Aaron's going to have the pivotal role? How can that be? So, Bezrat Hashem, we will look at these next week. And just one final thought. The garments of the Kohen Gadol we just mentioned are described as lekavod uletifaret, for honor and splendor. Where do we see clothes described kavod uletifaret, apart from Tetzaveh? The answer is in the Megillah. As Achashverosh set out on the feast, at the very beginning of the book, the words kavod and tiferet are there. And there's a hint from that, and the Midrash picks it up, that Achashverosh was handed some of the booty from the destroyed first temple. And that's picked up further when it talks about the kelim shonim, the various types of vessels. Mordechai and Esther writing in Megillah didn't want to say the truth because Achashverosh would have read it. So he just uses power of words. But there's a number of hints that this was from the destroyed temple, and the tragedy of that feast was, it seems the Jews of Shushan went to it and they were okay with it. But that's for another story. There's even a slight connection between Tetzaveh and the Megillah. I wish all of you a wonderful Purim and look forward to seeing you again next week, back at 8:30 next Tuesday night.